Hello everyone, this is Joshua Smith of Apollo's Artifacts. It is March 2018. I thought today that I would take a look at a Pew Research study from 2015 called A Deep Dive into Party Affiliation, where they reveal sharp differences over race, gender, generation, and education levels. Now, the most interesting part about this to me is actually the libertarian angle, which will take a while for me to get to, but I think this is going to be really indicative of a lot of the issues that we see today, especially when they go back and they talk about the changes that have happened over the last, say, 20 years, where you can really see the impact that 9/11 had, and then the moral turpitude of the neoconservatives under Bush, and then the rise of Barack Obama. Now, one of the things I'll point out in the beginning that they do not do a great job of looking at would be the 39% of the people who in 2014 identified as independents. These I'm supposing would just be centrists or people who are center-right or center-left, or who just don't want to identify with political issues at all. They do not do a great job of looking into that and explaining who those people are or where they stand and what they think. But it shows here their ultimate conclusion. Democrats hold advantages in party identification among blacks, Asians, Hispanics, well-educated adults, and millennials. Republicans have a lead among whites, particularly white men, those with less education, by which they mean some college and below, and evangelical Protestants, as well as members of the silent generation. So they break it down by various other categories. So with a strong lean towards Republican, they show Mormons, for example, 70% lean. White evangelical Protestants, 68% lean. White Southerners, 55% lean. White men with some college or less, 54% lean. Whites overall, 49%. And silent generation, which in 2015 were the ages of 69 to 86, was a 47% lean. Then the next section, groups that tilt Democratic, blacks at 80%, Asians 65%, religiously unaffiliated 61%, that would be the agnostics and atheists presumably, postgraduate women 64%, Jewish 61%, Hispanic 56%, and millennials ages 18 to 33 at that time 51%. In the gender category, they show, for example, that Republicans lead among married men, 51% to 38%. But when you go to unmarried women, it is a 57% to 29% Democrat lead. In terms of education, they show that Democrats lead by some 22 points in lean party identification among adults with postgraduate degrees. But the question there is how much of that is just a measure of very long-term indoctrination by leftists who fill up the entire school system. The K through 12 system, university system, all of it is massively leftist dominated overall. So how much of that is a cause-effect relationship is something that is not taken into account here. In a section called Party Affiliation 1992 to 2014, one of the things that they find is that there's a significant increase in the number of people who prefer to label themselves as independents. It says, the rise in the share of independents has been particularly dramatic over the past decade. In 2004, 33% of Americans identified as Democrats, 30% as independents, and 29% as Republicans. Since then, the percentage of independents has increased 9 points, while Republican affiliation has fallen by 6 points. Under another section, they have a portion called More College Graduates Lean Democratic, which is not a surprise, once again, once you know anything about the educational system and how it is constructed overall. But one of the things they show here is that among the group with high school or less, there's a Republican lean 52 to 47%. Now, some people would say, well, this is because they're dumber, so they end up on that side, but also it could be that they graduated high school and started up a business and had success in other areas, and they had no need to go on beyond that. Once you get into the category of having some college, there's a very slight 47 to 45% lean, and then with college graduate or more, it's a 52% advantage to Democrats. However, with those of postgraduate experience, the lead is rather dramatic. It goes up to as much as 56% Democrat and 36% for Republicans. They also examine this according to generation gaps. So among millennials, for example, you have a Democrat to Republican lean of 51 to 35%, Generation X 49 to 38%, the Boomer generation 47 to 41%, and then the Silent generation is a 52 to 38% advantage, which has narrowed over time from 1992 until now to a 47 to 43% advantage to Republicans. And you would think that the Libertarian Party would have interest in gaining access to this huge section of independents, but I do not really see them making much of a headway into that. Now, they also break this down according to religious affiliations and whatnot. So it says white evangelicals increasingly lean Republican. So from 92 to 2014, that has gone up from 59% to 68%. But among black non-Hispanic Protestants, that level has been very consistent from 92 to 2014, increasing only 1% from 81 to 82%. Among Catholics, you see some interesting figures there as well, where you have that party affiliation among all Catholics is similar to that of the public at large. 37% describe themselves as independents, 33% Democrats, 24% Republican, but about half of Catholics, 48%, affiliate with the Democratic Party or lean Democratic, while 40% identify as Republicans or lean towards the GOP. White Catholics lean Republican by about the same margin as all whites, 50 to 41%. Hispanic Catholics lean Democratic more than 2 to 1, 58% to 25%. And that would be the large contingent of both, as some want to say, undocumented workers or illegal immigrants or what have you. And this is a little different from the balance of leaned party identification among all Hispanics overall. 56% are Democrat, with only 26% being Republican. The next part points out that Mormons remain solidly Republican. Jews and the religiously unaffiliated lean Democratic. So Mormons from 92 to 2014 have experienced about a 2% drop from 72 to 70%, but it's still heavily Republican. Jewish 65% has decreased slightly to 61% in favor of Democrats. And then among the religiously unaffiliated, which presumably would be atheists and agnostics and what have you, has had a rather dramatic growth shortly after 9/11, from 50% in 1992 to looks like a little bit below 50% in 2000, and has shot up to 61% Democratic lean and plummeted to 25% of Republican lean among those. And that I would attribute to the disastrous 8 years in office that George W. Bush had, with their atrocious neoconservative wars that made absolutely no sense whatsoever. And we are still dealing with the mess and fallout of that today. But that would also be because of the bipartisan consensus on foreign affairs, which the Democrats largely share with the neoconservatives. Now, in an important study that they had in 2014, also from Pew Research, it's called In Search of Libertarians by Jocelyn Kiley. And this just really shows what a poor messaging job that libertarians have done overall. I mean, the number one thing for most libertarians is supposed to be that they're about education. They want to educate the public. They want people to know what it is, understand what it is, and all of this. And in that sense, it has been a resolute failure. And let me point out to you why. So the article starts off here. The question of whether libertarianism is gaining public support has received increased attention with talk of Rand Paul running for president in a recent New York Times Magazine story asking if the libertarian moment has arrived. But if it has, and it says here, there are still many Americans who do not have a clear sense of what libertarian means. And our surveys find that on many issues, the views among people who call themselves libertarian do not differ very much from those of the overall public. So some people who think that they're libertarians really pretty much are no different than anybody else. About 1 in 10 Americans, 11%, describe themselves as libertarian and actually know what the term means. Respondents were asked whether the term libertarian describes them well, and in a separate multiple-choice question, asked for the definition of, quote, someone whose political views emphasize individual freedom by limiting the role of government, end quote. 57% correctly answered the multiple-choice question, choosing libertarian from a list that included progressive, authoritarian, unitarian, and communist. They couldn't even tell the difference in these, a huge percentage of them. On the self-description question, 14% said that they were libertarian. For the purpose of this analysis, we focus on the 11% who both say they are libertarian and actually know the definition of the term. Now, that is completely embarrassing. They have an interesting little stat package profile over on the side. It says, who calls themselves libertarian? The percent saying libertarian describes them well, and they know what the term means. So the total is 11%. Among men, it's 15%. Women, it's only 7%. In terms of age breakdown, so 65 and older is only 9%. 50 to 64, 10%. 30 to 49, 11%. And 18 to 29, where there actually seems to be some headway being made, is 12%. That's pretty impressive. Among whites, it's 12%. Blacks, shockingly low, 3%. It would seem to me that lots of black people would be interested in libertarianism, but perhaps that is, libertarians' fault for not getting the message out better and clearer so that people know what in the hell it actually is. But among Hispanics, that actually has a higher figure of 11%. That's rather good to know and surprising. Among people with high school education or less, the figure is only 7%. Of course, that's not very shocking. I went all the way through high school, and I don't ever recall anyone talking about libertarianism at all, except in the sense of civil libertarian, which, the understanding of that just basically flies past everybody. Those with some college, the figure is 12%. Those who are college graduates and above, 15%. In terms of income, people who make less than $30,000, only 7% would identify as libertarian. $30,000 to $75,000, it's 11%. And then those who make $75,000 and above, the figure is 16% identify. Now, when it comes to political party identification and those who identify as, say, a libertarian version of that, the Democratic Party has a exceedingly low 6% of people who identify as both, some aspect of both. Then among Republicans, 12% of those are like a libertarian-ish version of Republican. But among independents, you actually do have a higher figure, which is good, but it's certainly not high enough, and that is at 14%. Now, the article continues here, and it points out that self-described libertarians tend to be modestly more supportive of some libertarian positions, but few of them hold consistent libertarian positions on the role of government, foreign policy, and social issues. And if you recall in the presentation that I did on Jonathan Haidt's study of libertarians, you find that a whole lot of them are utilitarians, and that would be probably, I think, the reason why the utilitarian version of libertarians are more inconsistent than certain other types of libertarians who take it as more of a absolutist, natural rights, natural law, deontological approach to libertarianism. It says here, some of these differences arise from confusion about the meaning of the term libertarian. Just 42% of those with a high school education or less answered the multiple choice question correctly, compared with 76% of college graduates. Libertarians more likely say government aid to the poor does more harm than good. And you have a breakdown here where it shows government regulation of business is necessary. So the total figures on that would be 47%, but among libertarians, it's 41%. On the other side, government regulation does more harm than good, which is the consistent libertarian position to take. 56% of libertarians say that is the case. 47% of the general public say that's the case. Now, among libertarians, that figure should be much, much higher. I mean, I would expect 85, 90, 95% to say that government regulation does more harm than good. Among the next category, corporations make too much profit. So the public at large says 56%. Oh yes, way too much profit. That's horrible. Who can imagine such a thing? How are you going to pay your workers, I guess, if you don't make profit? Libertarians had that figure at 46%. Corporations make fair profits. So the public at large, 39%. So there's a lot of people who are really angry that corporations make profits. Among libertarians, that figure was only 48%. You would think that should be, 75%, 85%? It should be something far, far higher than what the general public thinks. Under the category, government aid to the poor does more good than harm. So the public at large, 47% say yes to that. 38% of libertarians say yes to that. Of course, the libertarian figure should be much lower, I would think. Under the category, government aid to the poor does more harm than good. General public, 48% say that is the case, which is surprising. But among libertarians, it's 57%. Again, you would expect that to be 75%, 85%, 90%, something like that. And we come over to another category here where it seems to be more of a rallying point for libertarians for whatever reason. It says nearly 2/3 of libertarians favor legalizing marijuana. So under the category of the general public, marijuana should be illegal. 42% say that it should be. Libertarians, 33% say that it should be. The consistent libertarian position, of course, would be that no, So we move to the other category. Marijuana should be legal. 54% of the general public think so, which is good. It's progress in the right direction. Among libertarians, that figure is still only 65%. It should be much, much higher than that. And this has nothing whatsoever to do with whether or not I want to use marijuana. I have no interest in it at all. No plans on doing so or anything like that. But it's the big problem is the drug war, which wrecks people's lives all the time and makes it almost impossible for them to get jobs once they're arrested for felony offenses for, minor possession of marijuana. Under another category, this is really surprising. Libertarians somewhat more likely to favor an active U.S. role in world affairs. Now, why would that ever be the case? That cannot possibly be a consistent libertarian position to say, oh yes, the U.S. needs to go around and be meddling in other countries all around the world, even more so than it does already. I mean, there's some kind of weird neocon variant of libertarianism that I'm not aware of. Where do these people even come from? I'm shocked by this one. So these so-called libertarian self-reported answers here in this survey. Under U.S. involvement makes the world's problems worse. 46% of libertarians say yes. Problems in the world would be worse without the U.S. 47% for libertarians. Under best for the U.S. to be active in world affairs, 54% of libertarians apparently are saying yes. And under this last category, let me see, Americans need to be willing to give up personal privacy, right? 16% of libertarians, okay, go along with that. But 82% say that they should not have to give up privacy in order to be safe, which is more than the general public, and that is probably along the lines of what you should expect, maybe even higher, maybe 90% on that one. So these results created quite a stir, I guess, among the study group, as it has obviously for me as well, just reading it here. So they had to bore down into the numbers more to find out what is the solid, hardcore group of true libertarians that they could pull out of this study. And they say under this one model that they found that actually worked, the group with a libertarian profile constituted about 5% of the public, which means they hold generally conservative views on the social safety net, regulation of business, and liberal attitudes on homosexuality and immigration, and are less supportive of the use of military force when compared with the more conservative-leaning typology groups. They're also younger on average than most of the other groups, though a majority are 30 and older. And for now, that's all I have on that particular issue. I do plan to follow up more on this whole in search of libertarians issue, breaking down into the demographic numbers and figuring out who we are, who we are as a group, not just psychologically, but demographically. Who are we? Where are we located? And so on. Please like, share, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. Comment below. Thanks.